Thank you for your time. My name is Beytullah, and this is Shooting from the Hip. There's something I'd like to read to you. I appreciate you being here. Please keep in mind what we're doing here on Bet On It, Shooting from the Hip. We explore human ideas, philosophies, noteworthy information. This exploration is us thinking aloud, a thought exercise, jumping into ideas and examining them and re-examining them. You will find we're prone to using adult language and expressing opinions. In keeping with that, you shouldn't believe anything we say. We are not experts of any kind. We are just having fun with these ideas, philosophies, and information in the hopes that you will find it fun and interesting and entertaining. We encourage you to invest time in searching out these subjects and coming to your own conclusions. Now, on with the shit show. Slim, how you doing, buddy?
Straight up awesome.
That's fucking fantastic. Is it too early for profanity in the podcast?
Shit, no.
No, we're just starting. Today's episode of Shooting from the Hip, we're going to cover the topic of altered states of consciousness. And we're not going to do the typical thing, which is like people, their state of consciousness being alterated by like some form of inebriation, because that's the lowest hanging fruit, and it's an easy one. So we're gonna focus on cultural ways of use that it's altered states of consciousness have been employed, and we're going to talk about stress and how that is now more and more being looked at as an altered state of consciousness, right? How it influences your cognitive functions. Okay, so we'll start with I'm going to start with my note package, and so there's 5 states of consciousness classification, right? In terms of like how the consciousness is affected. Right, so there's these 5 different classifications, and the first one's pathological. So you could think of it like a disease process, like epilepsy or some form of brain damage, right? That does alter the function, so it alters your state of consciousness. And then there's the pharmacological one, which is psychoactive substances, which is the low-hanging fruit. It's the easy thing to talk about, and that would include everything from the consumption of alcohol to psilocybin, mushrooms or plants. Ayahuasca, DMT, all of them fit under that category. There's also a third category, which is physical and physiological, and usually has something to do with either some form of like Spartan kind of like way of approaching life. So fasting, pain, like excruciating pain, and even something as benign as sex, where it can be used to produce an altered state of consciousness, right? And then, of course, there's the psychological one, which includes things like hypnosis, meditation, and music, right? That those exert an influence in the way that your brain functions. So then, therefore, contributing to some alteration of consciousness. And finally, spontaneous, like from something as simple as daydreaming, which I was super guilty of as a child, to something as involved as like the near-death experience. Whether you believe in it or not, it still produces an altered state of consciousness, right? So, of the 5, most of us have experienced, by the time you reach adulthood, have experienced some form of each of the 5. Right, so I'm sure that you've experienced it yourself, right?
Yeah, that would make sense to me.
Yeah, and people listening to it. So like sleep deprivation, which would produce like the physical or physical and physiological alteration of your consciousness, right? So psychological, music and meditation, hypnosis, we talked about, it's come up a number of times when we talk, where you're talking about setting the mood when you wake up, and you start out in maybe not such a great mood, but you put on a piece of music that you love, and suddenly it elevates your state of mind, right?
Yeah, it can even be used to process more complex emotions, like if you're down, you listen to rock and roll, and you're like, okay, I'm back in the game.
Yeah. It's a I want to say that it's like a therapeutic way of using music that doesn't. It's not really therapy exactly, right?
A lot of people, when they think about therapy and intervention, they're thinking about like induced states of consciousness, like pharmacological.
Well, but again, so when we talk about this idea of like altered states of consciousness, um, and now that they're looking more and more at stress as because your biology changes, you're trapped in a fight or flight response, right? So it has an enormous negative effect on your cognitive function. So your ability to be in the moment or to like be present enough that you're able to make decisions for yourself and in your own best interest, so that you're not how shall I put it? So that you're not being exploited by others in any significant means, that your wherewithals, you're present enough that you can recognize that that might be what's going on, right? So, altered states of consciousness is a change in one's average mental state as a result of trauma, accident, or induced through medication, drugs, or some foods. The person is not conscious. There are many common experiences that create altered states of consciousness. Sleep, even in sleep, we experience it, or the lack of sleep. So think of the dream state, daydreaming, sleep deprivation, euphoria and panic, hypnosis, meditation. All those things are considered altered states, or they induce altered states. So, and all that really means is that whatever the nominal state of function of your consciousness, so whatever would be like zero, so that you could equate that to being the most balanced and kind of self-aware, that gets thrown out of balance, right?
Yeah, and typically people have a baseline of a certain emotion that's not at zero. Sorry if I'm complicating.
No. I'm just thinking about what you just said. I'm like, yeah, but here's the funny thing. Most people's base is an altered state of consciousness, because they from the moment they wake up, I don't want to say they're in crisis mode, but already the anxieties from yesterday now are part of the thought process, which produces feelings based on the thoughts that you're thinking, and then those very things influence your behavior, so that becomes then your attitude or your personality. And so you wake up, and within the few moments of you becoming aware that you're awake, all that stuff is at play.
Yeah.
So then it's influencing your physiology, so that it takes you out of whatever the balanced state would be. So then I wonder then if you're because I'm a notorious coffee drinker, so slim. If caffeine as a stimulant then contributes to an altered state of consciousness, right? Like so I'm part of me wonders if there is even such a thing as a zero state.
I feel like functionally there's basically no zero state. Like there is when we talk about it, like it's a concept.
Right.
But it's like, who's like that? Nobody.
I don't know. Yeah, I can't. Serious monks and meditators who don't like completely deny all like. Well, I was gonna say experiences, but I'm going. I don't know that they can deny experiences, but they deny their attachment. And I would submit to you that like your attachment to your thoughts and your feelings and your identity in terms of like your attitude and your personality, which are extensions of your feelings and thinking, that those things, being attached to those things, is what creates or contributes significantly to that stressed state. And that stress state then becomes like the new normal.
Yeah.
Because you're automatically cycling through all that stuff, and so it's constantly at work. So you're constantly having the same thoughts, experiencing same emotions from events that happened deep in your past, and you're reliving them virtually every day in the present.
Yeah, like a lot of people might associate that to sometimes as trauma, but it could be very simple too. Like one day I woke up from a bad dream. I was just pissy for hours. And I was like, okay, I got to do something, got to go for a walk. Or...
I'm in complete agreement with you that like maybe you can classify it as trauma, but I think it's a lot more subtle than that. I don't think it has to be an extreme experience. It's just the tired, same ass boring shit that you're confronted with day in and day out, and then you can't, you're attached to the memory and you can't let go of that experience. And the experience could be virtually anything, like your interactions between you and a friend or you and a girlfriend, and you can't let go of that, like that situation, that one moment that you keep replaying over and over and over again. And I've heard that described as 1/10 of being psychotic, right?
I mean, that makes sense. You're pissed at work day in and day out.
And think about the internal dialogue that you're having with yourself. You're not crazy because you're only having it internally, but the moment that you start verbally having that conversation, so now it's available for others to hear.
Right.
That's when you'd get labeled as crazy. But as long as it's internal and you're not verbalizing it, then you're not quite crazy. You're almost crazy.
Yeah, that's the tough part, because like day in and day out, you're gonna have these thoughts and feelings, but like to externalize these feelings and to speak out about how you feel is widely accepted as like a good way to deal with these emotions. But there is such thing as like focusing on a problem that you could let go of.
I think there's a lot of things that you can do to mitigate it. So I would agree. So like you're talking about like talk therapy, like being able to like, so you can listen to what you're thinking, so you can hear yourself say it, and then then analyze it to go like, hey, is it really necessary? And in the result of doing that, you disempower it, you rob it of its ability to exercise influence and stuff. But the funny thing is about that shit is that you keep re-experiencing it. That's the thing. People, but particularly if you make it to your 30s, you're entrenched into a very specific and particular set of programmed thoughts. So you keep re-experiencing them, and then no matter what's going on currently, you'll equate it to those past experiences.
Yeah.
Right? You'll draw connections, so then you keep perpetuating that past experience that was unpleasant, and now it's basically driving you crazy, right?
Talking about crazy, I was thinking about how we're the type of animal that can see into the future, think about the past. A lot of the things we do is like course correction based on our history. If we have these things we're uncertain about, it jumps up at us. I'm like, oh, what if this is the nail?
I think that you're 100% spot on, because these are functions of our brain, but that's an undisciplined and unruly mind at work.
Right. And when it's internalized and you don't talk about it, it could make you crazy. We'll use that expression, like not that you would be clinically insane. It just means that it drives your behavior. So now you're doing things that are unusual behaviors, right? Like that are driven by the trap of these repeating thoughts and feelings, right? Because there's no thought you're having that doesn't have a feeling associated with it. And then what you end up doing is you end up pulling that or drawing that feeling, or that thought creates that feeling, and then that feeling sets the mood for for how you're functioning, and now that's going to inform like how you physically behave. So then that becomes like basically your personality or your attitude, and you go like, and it's a shit one. Yeah, it's a really shit one. Like, if you're constantly being affected by your own thought and it affects you, like it's an echo chamber within your own mind, you're essentially training yourself to perceive things as bad, and then that's going to add to the echo chamber. That's right.
So now you're going to be constantly trapped, which is what we were saying just before we got started talking about this. That by the time you hit 30, now you're a bunch of entrenched patterns of thinking, entrenched feelings that you identify with. So you're attached to them. So when you've ever heard yogis or monks talk about non-attachment,
Do you think they were talking about like the material world you're experiencing, or the emotions and the feelings and the thinking, the patterns of thinking that most of us go through? And that quieting the mind, what they're talking about is like subduing that portion of you that, well, literally makes you suffer. And for anyone who's been following the podcast from the beginning, right, we lump all of that in subjectivity, right? Self-interest. You have to break with the view of yourself being primary, and then when you do that, that's when you liberate yourself, right? But most of us have been trained to be consumers, to be aggressive, to be all these things that benefit society in terms of the way it's structured and organized, because it's ultimately only about one thing, like personal gain and profit. The problem with that is the kind of psychological effects that ends up happening on the individuals who make up this society. It's the very thing that we're talking about, and it's why, it's why we have more people dying now. I think it was last year, more people died in the U.S. Over 100,000 people died of drug overdoses, and that's a direct result of them trying to cope with their reality, and they turn to that as a coping mechanism, and ultimately it ends up killing them. And if you look at all the interventions that the U.S. had in Vietnam and Afghanistan, it didn't produce the same body count now we're getting every year just from people who are overdosing. So again, it speaks to like just how stressed we are, or perhaps how unnatural of an environment that we've created in our society. So it's toxic, it kills people, or rather drives people to end up pursuing behaviors that end up killing them.
I would suggest this is comparable to, like, we have access to everything on the internet, but people are still getting misinformation. They're still going conspiracy theory route. Some of it may be true, but at the same time, it's like we don't have these guides in place to have a healthy lifestyle.
So all of that contributing then to the mental health of the average person, and then the average person incapable of actually finding a means that doesn't require any kind of dependency, doesn't require something outside of you to be able to address these very real concerns, which are proving to be lethal. So then people that's why they turn to alcohol and drugs. They're trying to distract themselves so they don't have to pay attention. The problem with that is you're not resolving any of the issues. So then it just starts accumulating momentum. And then eventually it gets to a point where it's so overwhelming, it won't matter how much drugs you do or how much alcohol you consume. You can't distract yourself anymore. And then it pushes someone over the edge where now they OD. And then the tragedy is that most of it is avoidable, but we don't have two things we're missing. One, we don't really understand what we are as human beings, and there's tons of conflict in terms ideas as to what we are as human beings. So I guess more specifically what I mean is an owner's manual. How, like, now that you have this body you're living in, how do you use it effectively? That's why cars come with owner manuals. How to use the car effectively. But we don't come with one. Now, having said that, now there's tons of really good data and research and studies that have been ongoing for decades now that suggest that there's a couple of things that actually make people even immensely better than if you bend them to a particular kind of bias, which is, a consumer-based driven society.
Yeah.
That if you teach them two things: one, to be present in the current moment, and two, to delay gratification. The ability to go, I'll do the work first, so I can have the reward later. Right. So if those two things, if everybody was trained effectively in those two things, and then with being present, we've talked about this endlessly, right? That you find a training method, and then the training method is meant to bring your attention always to the present. And then when when the training's done, then what you do, the carryover, is you take the lessons from the training into every moment, and then you're trying to always bring your attention back to the current moment, right? And so in the training, you do it based on your breathing and paying attention to your body. And then the idea is to translate that now over into every moment of your day.
That's a lot to take in, but I feel like that's an effective way of describing it. Because you think about these systems that are built off of subjectivity, and they pimp out people's time, their attention. Like, attention and time are very important in this conversation, I think. Because you think, like, as a teenager, you think, or going into your teenage years, you start realizing it's like they're not attentive in a certain way, regardless of who you're thinking of. And it becomes this cycle of they're not attentive, they didn't care about the future of like the next generation, all these things are going on. And then that lends the individual to go even worse into those issues instead of finding the owner's manual. Because like
for themselves, sure.
Yeah, you have to discover it. It's an adventure. Every single person's
so
life is.
I think part of the problem too is what the kind of the things that we impose on young people, like that, like you can only behave. There's only a certain kinds of behaviors that are acceptable, and thinking and emotions, when what we should be encouraging them to do is to, like, here, you should explore that emotion more fully. Right, like it doesn't mean you surrender choice to it, but you allow yourself to feel like. So if you're feeling poorly, allow yourself to so you can have the benefit of that experience, right? And then it creates, in doing that, and then allowing for them to like follow through on trains of thought, to follow them to their natural conclusions. It gives them the ability then to create like reference points. So now they can gauge, like, here, what would be more beneficial? See, you really want to do this, or would it be better to maybe go an alternate route where now it's more mutually beneficial instead of one-sided, and that sort of thing. Our society doesn't allow for it. It's completely one-sided. It wants only victors. But here's the problem with that kind of thinking. Only a small minority of us can be winners. If everything's reduced to like winning and losing, which is what a consumer-based society that's all about competition is about, then you're going to have a huge number of people who are going to experience nothing but dissatisfaction. So the problem is in the way that we kind of train people in experiencing real satisfaction, that these material gains are somehow like the metric or the measure way we measure satisfaction, instead of it being like more things like your connection to other people, genuine love, experiencing the natural world. These are the things that allow for us to become more grounded, to feel more centered. It's not what, you showing up to your job. Don't get me wrong. Part of having a material existence means that you have to have access to resources. So in this society, that means work. That you got to work so you can have, so you got payola, so you can fucking be able to, make it through the day, materially speaking. But it's at the expense then of, and I guess it's kind of metaphysical what we're talking about now, but it's at the expense of the satisfaction of the individual, so they can feel good about themselves. So that requires you to like follow passions and follow them like in a serious way, that you're not like wishy-washy, that you're dedicated, like it requires work, right? And after an 8-hour day of slavish 8 hours working for a genuinely unsatisfactory leadership, and people who just endless abuses of authority, that you can almost understand why people would just want to come home and then distract themselves.
Yeah, life can be really complicated. I guess it's not even worth bringing that up. Everything's complicated to some degree. But it seems like there's objective truths we could look at, like we're not satisfied the way our lives are ran, just going after the money. It's like, okay, then you have to get rid of materialism.
Well,
But that's the money part. It's like you can't get rid of materialism. We need hospitals. We
yeah,
need,
you
like,
need access to resources, and that's
Yeah.
what. And we do live. Whether you think this is like a complete fiction or the equivalent of a game of Sims, it's still a material existence. You still experience it in a physical way. So that means that there's basic physical requirements that you need to meet. The problem is that the society traps us in those basic needs.
Yeah, I keep
Right.
bringing up to my friend. It feels like the global stage is just WWE. It's just this it's this whole profit scheme. Like,
World Wrestling Entertainment.
yeah, that's what I feel like it is a lot of the times. But at the same time, that means that everybody out there is bad, and that's just psychotic thinking.
Well,
in my
no,
opinion.
yeah, but if it's not that we're inherently bad,
No, I don't
You're-
believe that. I'm trying to make a case against that.
right? But we're also subject to conditioning and programming.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of incompetence out there, and it's genuinely good people. They're just in the rat race that we
Or
all
they're lost
started.
and misguided.
Yeah, we all start that way.
This again, it's no small feat. So maybe part of the experience of living in the world that we're living in now, and at the state it's in, right? Because it seems more and more, if you buy into legacy media, that it's in a state of disarray. Everything's kind of a bit of chaos going on. Isn't that ripe and fertile ground then for an evolutionary leap forward? Right? Doesn't it create the potential then for us to sort of drop the burden of being trapped in your basic needs, and then you're free to pursue like things like self-realization, or you can commit a portion of your day every day to that, right?
I 100% agree. The way I think of it is there's a vacuum for meaning in people's lives. Like, there's a personal space that needs to be filled for meaning, and we're at a weird place where dictators become a little bit more. It seems more realistic to follow a dictator to some point, but you're right. Like, this is a chance for everybody to grow as individuals and say, "Hey, we don't necessarily need somebody giving us morality lessons. What we need is self-investigation,
Right.
like individuality."
100%. So, in the cult of personality that makes up our society, we all slavishly, look for the approval of the cult leader. I'm like going, that's the problem, right? And you're looking for solutions outside yourself, or you're looking for salvation from someone else, that they are going to bring it to you. And I would make the argument that not only are you capable of it, but you are the solution to all your problems. And then conversely, that means all the problems of humanity. But everybody's got to roll up their sleeves and get in there and do the work. And again, it's kind of daunting, especially if you go, I don't have an owner's manual. I don't know exactly how to do that. So maybe to a greater or lesser extent, we're just exploring not only the fact that that needs to happen, but how specifically to perhaps do that. And then again, we don't have answers. We're exploring the idea, and we look for reasonable solutions. But almost always, if you've been watching any of the majority of what we do here on Shooting from the Hip, you'll see that eventually, at some point, it's the individual has to kind of take control of their life, take responsibility for themselves. We advocate for that. That you want to see that change. You want a place where there's less fear and it's all light and goodness, and we all help each other out. That only happens one way. That's you as the individual take full responsibility for your existence, and then you're responsible for how you interact and behave with other people. And if you're thoughtful, you do it in a thoughtful kind of way, then potentially that represents the answer to all our issues. Yes, no? Disagree?
I'm just gonna add, I really like the word exploration in this context, because in my mind, to have a good life, you have to explore and be curious. But I'm not sure if there's a fine difference between exploration and adventuring.
I would say that you could probably use them interchangeably, and if you wanted to, you could make the argument that there are subtle differences. But to me, they seem like the same thing.
Right. That's why I would say, like, you have to do these things. You have to go out there, test the ground,
Yes,
take
100%.
notes.
Yeah, get out there. Don't be afraid to skin your knees, fall down, right? Like, it's all part of the experience. Nothing, what's that old expression? How did it go? Nothing ventured, nothing gained. You have to take risks. And that means putting yourself out there. That means climbing out to the end of the limb when you maybe the safer course of action would not be to do that. But in doing that, then you're pushing your limitations. You're seeing what you're capable of, what you can and could do. Then how satisfying do you think that would be if that was the cornerstone, or at least represented one of the cornerstones in the way that you live your life?
That at least lends to like exponential growth, because your perspective is now, hey, I'm capable. The world is less scary, or if it's scary in the area you adventured into, you at least have a better mapping of it. That way, you can deal with those issues when you come across them.
I agree. I would even go so far as to say that you should be grateful for fear. It's not that you don't want to be afraid, but fear points in the direction of the things that you should be going. So the thing you're most afraid of, that's what you should be pursuing. And what I mean by that in terms of resolving that fear, right? That like it's the indicator that's telling you, here, this thing you need to address. If you're afraid of it, you should address it, right? And in addressing it and liberating yourself from it, it's a huge confidence boost, man. It's a step up. It's momentum that you can build on, right?
I think that momentum aspect of what you said was very important too, because I don't know how to word this exactly, but younger people, from what I noticed, don't get out there. They're limited to bars, clubs, and their smaller social group. And it seems, I've said this a million times, it seems more tribalistic. But the issue with that for me is that there's no true individuality. It's more like, well, I'm mostly myself, but I'm also I'm also removing part of my characteristics to be more easily accessible to my friends. I don't do that with my friends, like the close ones that I know personally. I'm very open with them, and a lot of times I'm telling my friends, I'm like, hey, I'm concerned I'm at this age, and we don't have any strict idea of what's going on in the world. For all we know, this could be a story that we've been told, this and this and this. Like, I don't want to get too conspiratorial.
No, it's okay. But I understand what you're saying. Yeah,
fundamentally, I feel like a lot of young people don't notice there's solid ground under their feet once you put your foot out. You have to put your foot out first.
Well, I think part of what contributes to that is that the desire to be distracted, and when you think about like social media and the whole idea of becoming an influencer and how that's now uppermost, it's the new celebrity, right? And you don't need a big studio to support you. You don't have to be in a movie. You can create content from your phone and have the world fall in love with you, and then suddenly you're generating mad revenue. And so it's an easy out, and it doesn't require much in the way of skill or even to be intellectually competent in any meaningful way. It just means that to be able to present in such a way that you're charismatic enough and entertaining enough that now you can get a majority of people paying attention to your content, and then it's it's a paycheck. It's the easy out. So then for younger people, because it's a consumer-based society and because competition's a big part of it, they're looking for the quickest and easiest solution, right? And so to them and their inexperienced minds, what that means is they're looking for the quick fix, and what could be more quick than what social media allows for, right? There are people there are women who are Instagram models who make a generous living doing that. What's the other stuff that they're doing now, like the private content, right? Like so you pay for access and stuff like that, right? Like so it's this entirely new means of generating money, like livable income from basically just being you. It's like
A lot of them are very hot, to be fair.
well, again, it's not a question of like how attractive they are. That's notwithstanding, but now what the Kardashians have been doing for a couple decades, like on televised like their lives, now that entire model has been kind of juxtaposed to like TikTok and Instagram and all those other various forms of like that it's entertaining, but all that they're doing is distracting themselves, right?
Right. Like, these people, when they're doing these forms of content, like, you brought up Instagram models. I think they're mostly popular because they're attractive and they're easy to access, you know, and it shows them their value is like how accessible, how non-combative they are. And
But
that's dangerous.
But it's all superficial.
It's super superficial.
Yeah,
It's extra.
and again, having said that, please don't misunderstand. That kind of thing has its place, but if it's primarily or predominantly how you're spending your time, that's the problem.
Right.
Right. And again, most of the stuff that we're left failing with or left dealing with, almost always it's taken to an extreme, and that's the failure. There's no balance in being an extreme, right? So then you know you become it becomes a trap. And so I used to say this to my kids when they were growing up, when they first got phones and stuff like that. Like, for every hour you're on your phone, try and find a way to spend that another hour outdoors. Get outside, ride a bike, like even though it seems kind of benign, or you should have gratitude for the fact that you actually can ride a bike. You have the capacity to do that, or you can kick a ball around. And being present, you would be able to do all of that. But the problem is, for the majority of us, like I said, we just lean into it. We lean our shoulder into such an extreme degree that you know. I had coworkers who I would watch them. This was during COVID, when I'm not going to say where I work, but that basically were theirs to service members and to keep keep the location clean. And I remember coworkers who would spend hours just scrolling through TikTok. I mean, hours. Yep. They'd be there for like a 4 or 5 hour shift, and the majority of that shift, they would be sitting in a chair just scrolling through it on their phone. And I'm going, like, you're not even aware that that's what you're doing. You just presume that that's, like, there's no question in their mind that there might be something wrong with the fact that they're doing just that, right? I go, that's not living. Living's like experiencing the reality that we find ourselves in, right? So that means you got to get out there and, you know, risk getting your feet wet, and you know, the wind blowing your hair out of place, and you're not looking exactly pristine. I'd love to see TikToks where just average people like doing average ridiculous stuff, and right, and for that to have the kind of momentum and popularity that all these people who prune and preen, like, you go to their way to make themselves so presentable that, like, now you're basically kind of left gawking in them, right? Like, I mean, and again, I really do enjoy the internet, but I do in small doses. I only allow myself access to social media small amounts. And it's not because I desperately crave it. I'm going just to sort of maintain connection, like connection with friends. But beyond that, I go, now maybe it's a generational thing, right? I'm Generation X, so we grew grew up in the shadow of the boomers, who by and large were completely self-serving, narcissistic assholes, right? Who didn't have the benefit of the internet. And now, then all the generations coming up behind us, now they're trapped by their own ego and their patterns of thinking and their feelings, and nobody's and objectivity becomes the minority when it should be it could be and can be predominantly the way that we engage with the world. And that means you remove yourself, but everything's saying that you're supposed to be the center, right? Well, what's the point of being the center of the universe if you're all alone, right? Because that's what subjectivity does, right? You only favor your own self-interest, so then you become the focal point, but that means you're isolated, you're alone. But when you're objective, you're not the center of the universe, you're the universe, you're connected to everything, objectively speaking. And then you recognize that in the objectivity, so then what do you never feel? Isolated, alone.
Yeah, I was thinking about how people mention, like, oh, we're so connected nowadays, and yeah, we're so far apart. It's strange, isn't it? No, it
Not really.
It's strange in the sense that it points towards a potential future, but I think, but this is hindsight, so, I'm not being smart here. In hindsight, it seems like it was obvious.
Yeah, but again, part of it is the way you're culturally and socially conditioned. All that stuff impacts. So it impacts not just the way that you think, but that automatic portion of yourself. Remember, we've talked about this before, that most of us are walking through life on autopilot. We're not paying attention beyond the bare minimum, so you don't get run over by a car. And on the way over here, a perfect example, I had the right of way. A pedestrian just stepped out into traffic. Just stepped out in, while they got their phone going, and then looked up and then did that glazed over, like, kind of, they're not there look. And I just looked at him and I'm like, for real?
Yeah, I'm laughing, but that's terrifying, because there's people driving on their phones too.
Right.
They're just looking down for 5 seconds. Oh, we're just going to send a text.
And they're running on total automatic. They don't think anything is wrong with that behavior, or they don't see the potential threat that kind of behavior produces. You go like, come on, like, how much tragedy do you want in your life? Look, if the focus is all those negative experiences that you have, and they become your reoccurring thoughts, which produce those same feelings you had when that event initially occurred, and then you're spending all your time. I've lost my train of thought. You're spending all this time and in this negative place, and and then you're running on automatic. So now all the bad things that happen to you are a result of all those negative feelings and thinking, because it produces the same behaviors, and then you act surprised when the same thing happens to you, right? And you go, like, the details are slightly different, but it's essentially the same thing happen over and over again. Well, it's because you're trapped in this very specific patterns, right? Yeah. And then they produce this very specific outcomes, and then you act surprised when these specific outcomes reoccur.
Yeah, like, I'll talk to my friends and we'll say, like, terrible jokes, but at the same time we recognize if any of those things are part of who we are, like, oh, there's part of me that thinks it's okay to drink and drive if you only have a little. It's like, what's your problem? Why are you so attached to a drink that you're not able to
recognize?
Like, you can't just call a cab, or you can't just drink the next day. Socialization should be primary, not drinking with your friends.
Right. So then if you acted responsibly, you wouldn't even need to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Right? Because the person would sit there and go, okay, tonight I can't drink. Why? Well, because I'm driving. Right?
So yeah, my friends are responsible. I'm just saying, my friends and I have talked about this before.
No. I completely, I totally get what you're saying. I've known people who, I knew a guy once who, over the course of, I think, about 10 years, got 3 drinking and driving. And he did, and he got caught 3 separate times, and he's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. That you're trapped in that very specific patterns, right? Which are essentially like behavioral patterns, but as a result of like patterns of thinking, which produce patterns of feelings and emotions, and it produces the same outcome. It took him forever, and I don't know if this speaks to the value of fear. He became so afraid by it all that then he swore off alcohol. So then the question becomes, like Pavlov's dog, was it because of the negative experience that now it completely soured his attitude towards consumption and consuming and drinking? All right.
I get the impression that might be it. Like, that's how I feel about a lot of things. You have to associate it with something negative before you're able to get off of it.
Well, like you said, I'm like, far be it from me to like sit there and I'm a guy who's at one time or another, and all the old forms of distraction, I've at one time or another been trapped by. And it's taken me most of my life to get past all of them.
Do you know how bad people my age would make fun of you? Like, oh, you have an addiction? You read books? Oh, ooh. Like,
Well,
nowadays that's so casual. That's responsible behavior for people my age.
I really do still like reading books, but that's not the stuff I was referring to. I meant like from smoking cigarettes to not just tobacco, marijuana, alcohol. Those were the more traditional forms of distraction. It's not that they're less distracting now, and it's not like you guys have found alternatives, but coming from those experiences, and for me, it was really quickly realizing how empty they were, and then how much of a fucking struggle it was to get rid of them, right? Most of them, right? Because it was so tied in with the way that you socialize and with it's a familiar way to kind of spend that downtime, and then as you mature, you recognize, oh, they're way more productive things that don't require you to be distracted. Actually, that are more conducive to you being like present, like reading, which for example means that like the comprehension is a significant portion of reading. And most people, if you're tearing through pages but nothing of the content is registering, then you're just basically reading aloud. You're without paying attention to what's being said, right? You're just reciting words.
Yeah, I find it interesting because when you said distractions, I was thinking like, oh, are you talking about going to the bar, doing this, doing that? Because I was trying to think of what it was like growing up for you. Because now all of our distractions for people my age, very different, and it's very effective. But reading a book isn't it's considered a distraction way before your time even.
Well,
but once TV came by, books were good.
It's interesting that you say that, because like once the printing press got into mass use, which was about 1500, it meant in the 1500s, it meant the availability of literature and books, which prior to that time were for only a select few, right? So now they're widespread, and by the 1600s, they referred to as some form of mania, where the young people would just sit by candlelight and stay up all night and read books and stuff like that. Right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is that with every iteration and with every generation where there becomes another way, it is in part a distraction, but in terms of reading and stuff like that, you gain secondhand insights as a result of exploring information in that way, and it broadens your horizons. Well, the internet, this magical thing of things, it brings every ounce of available information to your fingertips, but most of us seek very specific avenues to be distracted by, whereas instead you could take a broader approach, and then you could balance like things that are purely meant to be entertaining to things that are meant to be informative, and then then you have to exercise, like you have to be discerning enough to be able to try and figure out like how much of this is bullshit, how much of it is accurate. And again, no small feat, right? Like, but it was not any less difficult, say in the 1600s when reading mania was the thing that we're losing our children to. Like when I was a kid, Walkmans were the thing. So when I was in my teenage years, and we'd plug into our Walkman, you guys walk around like full access to a universal library of music, and we were playing cassette tapes, and you just zone out and you'd crank the tunes loud. You're gonna melt your brain. So. Right, so the point I'm trying to make is that every generation experiences this, and that maybe even within your generation, then there's the potential then for, as you guys move through time, gain experience, and then you'll experience the same kind of evolution individually as maybe we did, right? Because there's a lot of people who are my age who are completely lost. Again, having said that, there's a lot of them who are grounded, right? So I think that'll be true for any generation, right? So, but I think it makes it all the more difficult when you're overstimulated because you're constantly seeking stimulation, right?
I could find a specific example of that, but in general, I think that's more than true. Like I know people my age who are just, I would consider them adults. Like they're awesome people. I can't even relate myself to them in most ways because I'm so much more like these, Instagram addicts who smoke pot, and pot smoking is a professional sport nowadays. We have dispensaries everywhere, and we got leagues in every apartment building. Like, it's unfortunate to see where it's at, but at the same time, it seems like a natural progression of freedom.
Well, it's not freedom.
Yeah.
It's the perception of freedom, right? Do you understand what the difference is here? Look. I'll break it down for you real quick. At the equator, the planet is moving 1,000 miles an hour, and at the polar caps, it's about 300 miles an hour. And you think you're standing still. Your perception is that you are standing still.
Yeah.
But you're somewhere between 300 and 1,000 miles an hour in rotation. All right. So the ability to have freedom of speech, freedom of thought, and freedom of action, how free are they if they're under a bias? Is it really freedom then?
I should stop using freedom by itself, but freedom of action is there. The problem is freedom of thought isn't there. People think they need to go to the dispensary. They think they need to go to the store.
Okay, so that's freedom under a bias. So you can refer to it like that. So then it's not actually freedom. It's conditioned behavior.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that real freedom is because this completely ties in with the attachment, that you're free of yourself and your biases and your preferences. Doesn't mean that you don't have them. You just don't acknowledge them or treat them with value. And think about how many people think every thought that they're having is meaningful and valuable. And then we wonder why there's so many people who are like completely hopelessly lost because they don't know what to do, and so, because they're so attached to their thoughts, to their feelings, and I'm like, all this stuff is, and here's the what makes it all the worse is that all the stuff that they're attached to is completely transient.
Would that be comparable to like reactionary? They get the thought, it happens.
Well, all I mean is that they don't last long. Like they're transient. Like your thoughts, your emotions.
Okay.
If you wait long enough, it'll change into another feeling, a different thought. And I'm going, well, how much value could there possibly be in them?
See,
if they have such a high number of occurrences and they occur so frequently that should tell you something that maybe there's not any value to them, right?
I didn't know what transient meant, so I thought you were associating it with being reactive, but transient thoughts are really important to think about. I mean, the idea of transient thoughts are
Yeah,
important
you
to
think about your emotions when you. It's not. It's not like when you get you're having a bad feeling and bad series of thoughts and they're feeding off each other that you stuck there. You get tired of that after a while, and then you go, "Oh, puppies!" And then right, like you start thinking something else. You start and you start having another experience, or you play a song, and you start it elevates you for a moment. And now you got to deal with somebody who's like, picking their nose while they're making your food, and you're going like, I'm not eating that. And now you're getting all worked up and hostile because of other people's behavior. So everything that you think and feel transits from whatever you're currently thinking and feeling into something else, right? And typically they're tied because of the nature of them, right? So depending on who you ask, it's between 6,000 to 70,000 thoughts a day. And that largely is dependent on how you define a thought. And those things are ruling the roost, but they revolve. You're not going over and over. You are going over and over through the same thoughts, but you're not doing it at every waking moment. It's a series. It's groups of different thoughts, right? So because you don't have one life experience. You don't have one form of stimuli that produces it. Whatever you're exposed to produces like a number of repeating thoughts and emotions and stuff, and so that's what most of us contend with. And then you compound it further with you being constantly distracted by notifications, your phone constantly going off. You don't even actually talk to people face to face. Everything's a text message. You send a note, and the majority of human communication, a portion of it is verbal, but a significant portion of it is body language, being able to read the body language, to see the expression, to see their eyes, to see what that will tell you as much, if not more, than what they're saying. But now you remove that from the process of communication, and now it's just straight up text. So you can see where very quickly that means if you're reading something, depending on how well or poorly it was worded, you'll interpret it in a different way.
That's very important to think about when you think about how, I'm not going to say illiterate, but a lot of people are using way too much slang, a lot of shortcuts. Like, their language in text is awful. I don't know why video calling isn't more popular.
You would, because I don't know, all the science fiction tropes I grew up with meant that you would have instead of like having a phone call, you would have a video face-to-face chat with them. Right?
Yeah, or like a hologram.
Yeah. So the fact that like now the predominant form of communication is not only just texting, but now it's spawned an evolution in terms of like expediency, like to be able to write words and stuff. So you have everything's abbreviations and stuff, and now it becomes its own language, right? Like that, like a separate language from the root language.
I'm turning off the volume. So, he mentioned phones. I gotta take my phone out and check everything.
See, it's okay, right? So, wow, so that's kind of pretty far afield, but it's all everything that we've cited so far has been really accurate. Now, I did want to comment on the states of consciousness, right? Because consciousness, like, how do you define it? Well, it's self-awareness, right? Like your capacity to be able to recognize that you're actually having the thoughts and that you're actually presently here. And so then in your ability to do that, is that the same as being conscious, right? I think they're interchangeable myself, but depending on who you ask. But there's so many different things that are at work in terms of consciousness that can have like a crazy effect on our ability, our cognitive functions. So these different states of consciousness. Straight up awareness is the quality or state of being aware. It's knowledge and understanding that something is happening or it exists, right? Knowledge is a perception of a situation or a fact, which is everything that we sort of talked about leading up to me just reading the different definition of awareness. So awareness in and of itself is your ability to sort of recognize the fact that, of what you're doing, that you're presently in the middle of doing something. It's that capacity, right? So again, you can see where then all of that could influence the way that you behave, right? Because ultimately, that's what all this stuff impacts is your behavior, right? How you conduct yourself with others, regardless of age, other living things, regardless of species, right? All that stuff becomes informed by these different things. Biases, which we've covered endlessly, and because it's important. People don't think about their biases as a prejudice, but it's exactly what your bias is. It's usually when you favor one thing as opposed to another thing, right? And usually it's almost always in an unfair way, because it's a selfish you selfishly favor one thing over another because it relates to you specifically. And remember, right, part of all the suffering, all the psychological stress and disorder is rooted in treating those preferences or prejudices, biases, as though they're valuable. They're not. They're just a unique way to express your own individuality, but beyond that, they're kind of meaningless. But if you infuse them with meaning, now it's a wedge you can drive between yourself and other people. So then that biases produce an altered state of consciousness, right?
I would say it sounds like you're saying that all these biases we have, like all the value we put on our own thoughts, is what's ultimately handicapping us from becoming more conscious and aware.
Yes, and it also contributes to further division amongst us, right? So you described it as tribalism before, where you break up now into tribes of people who share the same biases and prejudices, and largely to validate your own biases and prejudices. You don't need validation of them. You have the freedom to have them. Don't treat them like they're valuable. The moment you treat them like they're valuable, then it becomes the border that's drawn on a map. It's not real.
Yeah, but people want certainty, so they'll go at any lengths to draw these borders.
Okay, then perhaps maybe the goal should be to be comfortable being uncertain.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah. So consciousness is often considered that state of being, or awake, or an awareness of one's surrounding, the awareness or perception of something by a person, the fact and awareness of the mind itself and the world. And remember, I think the best example was the idea that your perception is that you think you're standing still when you're on a planet that's spinning, depending on where you're standing at, 1,000 miles an hour, right? And somehow, in your mind, that's not what you're experiencing, right? So consciousness again becomes impacted by all these other things, right? So then it becomes altered as a result of the way you would interpret things. So, if you favored critical objective thinking over over interpretation, because interpretation means that somehow you're going to bend what you're experiencing or seeing to your biases. That's how you're gonna interpret them, based on biases. And biases already act to divide all of us. So then there's no value. Here's the ultimate thing: they're seeking value, but there's no value in the thing that they want to be valuable, which is their own self-interest. It's entirely rooted in their ego, and it's the only thing it's the thing that creates division, and again, it contributes to how much they suffer, right?
Yeah, I was gonna agree with you. But the one thing is, like, to their ego, there is value. Objectively, I would say there's no value objectively, but if you're trying to service your ego because it wants ice cream, that has a lot of value. It's just within that perception.
Right, but you can't treat it as though it's valuable.
Right.
Right? Like, so if you haven't had dinner yet and you're going, well, I want the caramel fidget. That's what your ego would want.
Yeah.
So it's not, the problem's not you wanting the ice cream. Right? You go, here, how are you going to go about servicing that want?
Yeah, of course, because you can wait half an hour.
Okay, so then how would you describe that waiting for a half hour? Being responsible?
Maybe dedicated to health. Maybe you could say it's a little bit of discipline.
Being responsible?
I would say responsible, yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. So the responsible thing to do would be to have a proper meal first, and now you can indulge in your... Because it's not an indiscretion. You're just going to indulge in that thing. You like it. If you like it, you fucking like it, right? But you also have to pair that up with, like, good judgment. And part of good judgment would be to go, here, like, you haven't had any real food yet today. Maybe having, like, a boatload of sugar drowned in more sugar might not be the way to go. Maybe you should have a proper meal, and then you can indulge yourself. So it leaves room for you to be able to have the benefit of that, but again, you approach it in a reasonable fashion. Yeah, agree, disagree, don't care. So I want to actually do an entire episode on hypnosis. But we're just going to talk about it real super briefly right now because it's a super fascinating state of mind. So hypnosis is that state of consciousness produced by a hypnotic trance, or an induced hypnotic state, where the person apparently loses voluntary control of action and is highly responsive and suggestive, or highly responsive to suggestion or direction from somewhere else. Now, it actually is an effective tool for therapy. It's also a form of entertainment. Right? Have you ever experienced a hypnotist show? They were really popular in the 90s, right?
No, but it was a chicken for a while.
I can imagine that. Here, buck, buck, buck.
Yeah, but it's insane to watch. Like,
because working in nightclubs, I got the benefit of experiencing shows, and it was more interesting talking to the hypnotist after the show, and listening to some of the stories they would tell, like where they'd put people under, and then for the sake of argument, another personality would emerge, and undirected by the hypnotist, and they would and sometimes it would make them, it'd be unsettling, all right, because of this other personality.
The fact that there's another personality, that's strange by itself.
Well, it could speak to some kind of form of, like, mental disorder, but it might not. Right? Like, again, it's one of those things, super trippy, and you can spend a lot of time, like.
I hope we do.
Oh well, like I said, I only want to touch on it now, but
right.
Eventually we're gonna turn it into. We're gonna explore it and advertising at the same time.
Okay,
right, but not today. But
hey,
again,
I'm okay with that.
and much like everything else we discuss here, there's tons of overlap, right? So anyway, it's really good for in terms of recovering suppressed memories and stuff, so that for people to experience some kind of psychological resolution in terms of therapy, right? And then for entertainment purposes, it's kind of obvious, where the suggestion is that they can't see something, and then you're constantly presenting it, and then the person's going like, well, there's nothing here like that. I don't know what you're talking about, right?
I know what you're talking about. I just don't. I can't think of examples or exactly what it means to me.
Yeah, I would just YouTube someone under hypnosis, just like for entertainment. Just do something like that. You might be surprised by what you find. Anyway, having said that, then we can move on to sleep is considered an altered state of consciousness. And it's not the sleep per se, it's the dream state that we enter. Because, again, you're a willful participant because you got no choice in the dreams that you're having, right? Like you're as they occur, you're a participant in them to a degree, right? But it also means that you're subject to the experience of the dreams, right? So now, having said that, that again, it's another way to have internal stimuli producing like very specific responses and stuff. And then think about in the dream when you wake up, like if it's a scary dream and you wake up suddenly and abruptly, like it's shocking, and that again it contributes to your you're coming out of that alteration of your state of consciousness because you're waking from that altered state. But in that altered state, there's no limits. Anything goes, right? Think about like how bizarre some of the dreams are that just you personally have. Like, and I'm someone who doesn't really have a really good recollection of dreams, but the ones that I do, I go like, so weird, right? It's so bizarre, right? They work crazier than an episode of The Twilight Zone. If you guys ever watched an episode of The Twilight Zone, right? So, what we'll do is we'll move on to like, in that dream thing, we're gonna just talk about rapid eye movement, which is REM sleep, right? So that's the deep resting state. And the crazy thing about this is that it makes up. First of all, it makes up about 25% of your dream state. REM sleep makes up 25% of your total sleep. And in that REM sleep, the brain activity is the same kind of brain activity as though you have when you're awake. So then you could equate that to then like that's what would explain why the dreams are so vivid. They feel like very real place, and that they're a very real occurrence. And I know that there's some people who would argue that maybe the dream state is you glimpsing another reality of you and stuff like that. But I go like, hey man, some of the content's so crazy and over the top, you go like, there's no way there's a reality like that. But then again, maybe perhaps it's what's happening. You're glimpsing a reality that you exist in, if you buy into the whole idea that there's a mad multiverse and an infinite number of you who exist in an infinite number of capacities, right? So
I've heard a bunch of different ways dreams might be this or that. One way I think would be beneficial if it's a way to tap into your own subconscious. That way you could like speak to your subconscious and really get into deep emotions.
Well, I think that's the whole. I think that's part of like that whole therapeutic use for the hypnosis and stuff, is to access your subconscious, which is typically, is the way I understand it, the way it was explained to me, is that it drives your dream state, right? But when I was looking up information for my note package, there were all consistently it said that like when you're in the rapid eye movement, that REM sleep, that's a deep sleep, that your brain activity is like you were awake and active in the real world. So then, so it's super suggestive. I don't know if that actually means it's just your brain doing what it does. So maybe it does do that, recycle through all your experiences, or it's an amalgamation of your experiences that you get to experience a second time, but in a distorted kind of way, right? Like I couldn't say, but again, it's an altered state of conscience, right? Altered state of mind.
It's strange because within my own dreams, I've realized there's multiple states of consciousness, and the ones I've experienced are all normal. Like I've had angry dreams, happy dreams, just ecstatic with joy. It's interesting to me to see that range within dreams. I'm not sure what it means, but it's fun.
Well, there's tons of people who invest a lot of energy in like interpreting dreams, and that somehow that there's something more meaningful to them. There may be, uh, but the more rational side of me is like, I lean more towards the idea that maybe it's just a random function, that it's not inherently meaningful, that maybe what you shouldn't be doing is reading into the dreams beyond the fact that they're just dreams. They might be more, but
I'm just gonna say I've tried 2 dreams to like do the dream reading thing. It wasn't on me; it was of someone else.
right.
And then I asked them questions afterwards. It seems like if you're in a place of mania, these dreams do try to break through and say, "Hey, you gotta fix your shit, dude." Like,
Oh, so it could be a way for your mind to try and draw your attention to something
yeah,
that needs to be addressed.
but I only did 2 of the dream readings on this person, so I don't know if it's effective. I don't know if it's.
You're way out of my depth of field, out of my depth of field. So, to me, I just find all this stuff super interesting, right? So, trances are part of that. Again, it's another altered state of consciousness, but that. I hope you don't mind me moving on, but
Oh, it's fine.
so the trances that being that this is the last one of these altered states of consciousness, and it's defined as a state of semi-consciousness in which a person is not self-aware and is either altogether unresponsive to external stimuli, but nevertheless capable of pursuing and realizing an aim, or is selectively responsive and following the directions of a person, if any, right, who has induced a trance. This process is a form of altered state of consciousness, widely reported across cultures, right? So trances are a common occurrence culturally across the globe and across time, and this is in this capacity, right? Entering these states is often linked to auditory stimuli such as singing, chanting, or rhythmic drumming. The term trance can be associated with hypnosis, meditation, magic, flow. We've discussed flow endlessly here. Prayer, psychedelic drugs, and you're right. So hypnosis is a trance-like mental state, but the experiences, again, and attention and concentration and suggestibility are different, right? Because someone who's in a trance are basically like catatonic. And if they move and act, they move under their own accord and actions, but they're almost unresponsive to any external stimuli. So culturally, we've seen this in the form of like individuals who've been characterized as mystics, right? That generally entails direct connection or communication or communion with some kind of divine entity, or the divine, or God, if you will, right? And the trance and the cognitive experiences, usually you find them like associated with things like yoga, Sufism, shamanism, Kabbalah, and Hasidism, right? So these are different mystical traditions where the trance, this altered state of consciousness, the trance, was treated more like a part of their sacrament to their particular system of magic, or mysticism that you attribute to any of these groups. So they used it as a way to maybe divine truths, to achieve some form of understanding, right? So it's kind of interesting. It's not, again, altered states of consciousness have been a part of the human experience probably as long as there's been humans, right? So, and it just takes different forms and shapes, but the fact of the matter is that it's there. It's ever present. It's been a part of the human experience, whether or not we formally or legitimately recognize it or not, right? The military in 2011, researchers proposed the term battle trance. So it was a term they used to describe a mental state in which combatants do not feel fear, pain, they lose the entire sense of themselves and acquire a collective identity. Right? So you could see where that might be beneficial to frontline combatants. And again, the fact that there's an awareness of it speaks to like the fact that how altered states of consciousness are ever present in most every human endeavor. And then I'm going to just mention Franz Anton Mesmer, right? He was influential but discredited promoter of trance states and their curative powers. So animal magnetism, remember we talked about it one episode, doesn't matter, right? And like I said, there's tons of hypnotherapies that introduce trance and hypnosis in orthodox medicine and psychotherapy. So again, in a very real world kind of sense, you don't have to be a mystic. There are doctors who are employing it to help people resolve, mental health issues. So it's a real thing.
I want to hear more cases of it resolving like physiological issues.
I would. It's not physiological. It's psychological. But even though there's the mind-body connection, so if you resolve a psychological issue, it could have a physiological response. I mean, so an embodied response. So and we talked to no end about the placebo effect. So affect the state of mind, and then it might have a very positive or negative effect on the state of the body, right?
I could definitely reason out. It seems like it would be more effective on the mental capacity of a person rather than the physical. Because like you say, well, you didn't say this, but what I'm saying is it seems like the placebo effect and just experiencing something is, it's going to change physiological things in you, but more mental than anything.
Right. Well, depending on who you talk to, they'll tell you that an elevated state of mind, that it can have like that kind of effect, so that instead of taking medicines from some external source, your body will produce whatever is required to resolve whatever the issues are. So it upregulates whatever genes and gene expression, so that it produces an internal pharmacology that resolves whatever the health issue is. Now again, how much truth is there behind that? Like, because most of the stuff is just it's all anecdotal. But you have large numbers of people who experienced physiological resolutions to like late stage 4 cancer diagnoses or terminal diseases or just horrible disease conditions, and they through the power of their mind are able to resolve those conditions.
There's people who go to behavioral therapy, and one thing they get done to them is like they're hypnotized to be in a transitory state, and they're more suggestible, and then this person would do one-on-one therapy with them. So I could realistically see how being in trances and using these methods you brought up, it could have physical changes that are extreme that we just aren't aware of. So it's not
like extremely beneficial, or I guess negative. But I think altered states of consciousness might be a part of that whole process if you're going to buy into the idea that the placebo effect is not only real, that it can have a potent effect. Maybe that's how it does it. Right?
So I'm so looking forward to hypnotization episode.
Hypnosis, yeah, that'll be a ways off yet. But so these altered states of consciousness, I was always fascinated by this as a kid, but the idea of the vision quest. Yeah, are you familiar with?
I recognize it. I just don't.
Okay,
know.
so it's an attempt to achieve a vision of a future guardian spirit, traditionally undertaken at puberty by boys of the Plains Indians and peoples, typically through fasting or self-torture or a rite of passage, right? It's something of a supernatural experience in which an individual seeks to interact with a guardian spirit, right? And usually it's an anthropomorphized like animal, so it's kind of, like you got like a fox head and human body, that sort of thing, right? And it's all to obtain advice or protection. The vision quests were most typically found among the native peoples of the Americas. And the elements of the vision quest, each indigenous tribe would have its own unique ceremony and naming, so they didn't all call it like a vision quest. It's just become the common way of referring to it. The common elements are that, because usually it was like a rite of passage for boys to become men, solitude was a component of it, time spent alone in nature, fasting and seeking understanding or purpose through connection with both the visible and invisible worlds, right? So these vision quests are archetypal journeys of wholeness, healing, truth, and wisdom, which done alone in the remote wild. So, to me, I always, like I said, the first time I became aware of this when I was at that age, like 14 or 15. That this was even a thing, that this was used as a rite of passage from like being a child now to becoming an adult. Now, it wasn't exclusively males, but it was predominantly males that would participate in that, and not every indigenous culture used it. But it again, and you spend. Can you imagine? Now you're isolated. You're away from your tribe. You're in the wild. You have to fend for yourself. You have to, and if you think of that time period, there's no external stimuli other than the natural world itself. So, in this world of hyperstimulation, what do you think we've lost in terms of our ability to connect with reality or the natural world? Because we don't experience silence anymore. Now we're constantly bombarded, right? Every waking moment. So imagine if you had to, typically they would spend like 3 to 4 days out in the wild, right? So can you imagine then, like, probably not eating a lot, probably just enough water to keep going. So that, and then we know that fasting state, that fasted state, could produce altered states of consciousness where now you're interacting with things that may or may not actually be there. They could be products of your mind, might actually be a very real experience. So I always found that kind of fascinating, this whole idea of the vision quest. So again, it's one of those things that, like, still, even as an adult, like almost a senior adult, where I find myself still thinking about that sort of thing. What would it be like to spend 5-6 days in absolute silence, right? And you're in the natural world. You're surrounded by it, but there's no other humans, no other human interaction. How might that play out on your psyche, right? So,
I think for people that come from our culture here within the city, more or less, it would be devastating to them because they would have to face like what I would consider like meta realities. Like, oh, I could die right here and now. Oh, I'm already half starving, half dehydrated. Like, they won't care about their phone anymore, but the level of revelation they'll have going out there and realizing, hey, existence exists. It's not just an experience. It's like, I feel like a lot of people would just lose it. I say existence exists, it's not just an experience, but That's very muddy to me too.
Well, I think about the way most people today, like the conventional way of experiencing nature. You're almost always there's some form of music. It's loud. Consumption becomes a part of consuming, like drink, alcohol, drugs becomes a part of that experience while you're out in the natural world. So basically, you move what you do at home and you move it out into a natural setting, and then you have the experiences that go with it. But imagine being out, and so maybe you're spot on. Maybe people become undone, but maybe that's the point.
Yeah, that's what I think. Worst case scenario, they don't become undone and have that vast realization.
So
I'm concerned they're going to go out there and trivialize it. Like, oh, I don't think realistically they would, but
what if in the course of like 2 to 4 days alone like that, now you start having like a dialogue. It might be with yourself or an invisible entity, the invisible world that they cite. That's part of that, like that is the natural world that we can't access because we're hyperstimulated, we're overstimulated, and we're constantly bombarded by stimulation. So you can't ever get into that state where you're able to do that.
yeah, that's one thing I was considering when I thought about this. Like, I think it's likely people would trivialize it, but at the same time, at some point, if they have no access to internet, there's nothing around them that's even remotely, city. Like, you're in nature.
Yeah, the natural world. You have to make fires to stay warm. You have to.
Yeah. I think the fact that they're alone, that's going to be the most damning thing. Once they realize, oh, I'm starving, I'm dehydrated, the first thing they're going to realize is, holy shit, I never understood what it meant to be human.
So interesting. So maybe there's value in having an experience like that. I couldn't say. Like you said, I think for some people it would be a risk to their mental health. They might never recover from an experience like that. For others, it might be just like completely enlightening, right? Like,
I think most people get the perception like, oh wow, now that I'm alone, starving, and I'm having these hallucinations, and it's very impactful on my emotional self, like, they start to realize like, oh, I've done a lot of good things with my life, and relationships mean so much more to me than I ever thought before. I think it would be beautiful for them. But for people who aren't used to being like confident,
well, again, remember that culturally, that was part of the some of the indigenous cultures. So I don't know if I can't imagine it's a practice that continued to this day. But again, like I said, from the first time I encountered it, I was fascinated by it. Right, like this idea. So, is it all a product of an altered state of consciousness, or are they actually interacting with a more subtle world than one that we get to experience? We don't get to experience it because we're constantly bombarded by light and sound and that sort of thing. So maybe it really is there. Maybe it is out there to be experienced, right? So having said that, so you didn't get a time check?
like the time,
No, how long have we been at this?
we've been running for an hour and 33 minutes,
Okay, cool. And the actual time of day?
5:48.
Okay, cool. So I think I want to talk about Dr. Joe Dispenza briefly. He's somebody whose work I find, again, super interesting, really, really fascinating, and he's using science to kind of address the entire mystical experience, right? So mysticism, which we briefly just talked about in terms of like, a much more direct and profound connection and communication with I don't want to use the word divine, but I guess that's accurate. But even Joe Dispenza doesn't talk about the divine. He talks about connecting to a much larger self, yourself, right? And as a result of doing that, you open yourself up to the capacity to, and this again does dovetail with the placebo effect, that you open yourself up to the capacity to resolve health-related issues as a result of, using very particular forms of meditation and presenting with gratitude. Right, so this is an altered state of consciousness where now the focus of the consciousness now is to be grateful for everything you experience, good and bad. Like you don't make the distinction. You're just grateful for the experience, and that as a result of doing that, you invite greater experience into your life. And he allegedly he makes the claim, and he gets people to speak to that end who've had very serious health issues and experienced resolution of the health issues, right? So again, the reason why I chose altered states of consciousness rather that I'm fascinated by it, to me it might be the vehicle by which that you could we know that if meditation is a methodology that produces an altered state of consciousness, you can resolve psychological issues. And now the claims also that very same methodology not only can address psychological issues, but physiological issues and life-threatening ones, where they're basically reduced to nothing, where there's zero impact and almost zero any kind of like telltale signs left within the individuals who experience complete remission of whatever it is that they're confronted with, right? So from things of like, psychological problems to people suffering from, life-threatening diseases and cancers and pathologies like that. So I find it fascinating. And he talks about how 95% of who we are by the time we're 35 is a memorized set of behaviors and emotional reactions and unconscious habits that are hardwired attitudes, beliefs and perceptions that function like a computer program, and that 5% of your conscious mind is making choices. 95% of that's what's going on in your life, autopilot. You're unconsciously doing shit, and that in that unconscious stuff, it opens let me try that again in English. It opens the door for disease process. That 95% of those hardwired patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving, that those are the things that open up the door to disease process. Because there's a ton of like disease processes out there that for medicine, their origins are completely unknown. Like there's no reason why. Like you have diseases that have a very specific origin, something that specifically produces the disease effect, and then you have disease symptomology without a specific source, right? So and he attributes that as a product of mind. So this is the nocebo effect, right? And the placebo effect is essentially what we're talking about, right? And that again, as a result of these altered states of consciousness. So if you allow for it your mind to be run on autopilot and subconsciously, and 95% of it is run like that it produces the nocebo effect. And that if you actively act with that 5% where you're allowed to conscious choice, and then what you do is you use that conscious choice and meditation in conjunction with meditation to create another altered state of consciousness, which actually produces the placebo effect, which would provide the resolution for disease process.
Yeah. No, like that's a long string of reasoning, but it's reasonable, like for sure.
It's not, certainly, I completely agree. It's certainly not unreasonable, but the question is, and he's trying to get, and I don't know how much he's trying, but he's trying to get medical institutions and universities involved, right? So that he can create data, so that then now they can go, here, look at the data. What's the data saying, right? And so again, I find it, like I said, super interesting that the fact that he's having people who show up and attend his seminars, and you know, not immediately, but there's some, I guess, instances where people resolve health issues immediately, but then people who over the course of, like, say, a year or two, start applying that methodology, the meditation program that he provides, that they experience complete resolution of whatever their health issues are. To me, that's super endearing, the idea that we could control or that we could exert that kind of influence on our health, and by, again, playing with our own state of consciousness. And that, you know, we briefly talked about it, but like hypnosis, trance, the vision quest, all these things, they produce these altered states of consciousness, meditation, yoga, all these things that have been cited. And that, applied correctly, can be extremely beneficial. Applied incorrectly can also be bad, very bad, right?
Yeah, because you're opening up your own consciousness and its pliability.
Right.
If you keep directing yourself to these negative, subjective things, even though you don't feel as though you're controlling your subconscious, you're allowing control over your subconscious by, like, these behaviors that are trained by you,
and emotions and thinking, right? So then that means you're setting yourself up for a majority, or for an potential health related issues. And think about how much cancer is consistently grown among human population.
You would think somebody would go, oh, how does this happen? Oh, it's a dysregulation in gene. What deals with dysregulation? Like, maybe the mitochondria. Then why is that fucking
okay?
wrong?
So and then in the altered state of consciousness, and if it's 95% of them are hardwired and they're negative, and it's you're constantly playing out these negative kind of patterns and of, you know, thinking, feeling, and behavior, that's what that it could be the very thing that's producing the disease process. So then the counter to that then would be to induce altered state of consciousness, which undoes the disease process, right? So for me, the idea that, like, potentially that we have the power and the capacity as individuals to kind of directly influence our physical and psychological health. Again, another thing that I find really endearing, I'm going, like, the fact that, look here, we could be our solution to our own problem. I said this earlier on. You can resolve. You don't need someone to come and save you. That you're the solution to everything that troubles you, right? Whatever it might be.
Oh, I was gonna say a couple things. Like, I don't remember what culture it is, but they have this term. It's something like healing hands. And
The laying on hands.
It has something to do with if we're gonna try to talk about, like, scientifically,
we're not experts, so yeah, I don't think we need to do that.
Okay, so essentially these people are having a physiological effect on a person's body, and you can say, oh, they're doing woo-woo magic. It's like, okay, but
you can even if you want to characterize it like that.
Yeah, sure. But what I'm saying is, they're getting results. So regardless of the methodology, you have to at least go, okay, is it within the patient's brain to do this, or is that person's hands really magic or whatever? I'm just saying, objectively speaking, if you're able to reduce the problem down to, like I was saying earlier, let's say you have a disease and it's caused by a dysregulation of something, and there's a cell that deals with that regulation. I don't know about biology. I'm just saying.
Yeah, okay, no, that's fair.
Like, you would have to look into that cell and go, okay, there's a ton of crazy stuff going on, but at least we know which cell out of the millions of types of cell.
Well, again, that's for the experts to figure out. So
yeah, like, I just think methodology is less important than elimination of things that you know aren't related.
Okay, so I want you to carry on with that thought. I actually got to go to the bathroom, so I'm going to take a break. So you can just, if you can just keep going, I'll be right back.
All right. So, I don't know. Do I turn the camera around?
No, just keep talking.
All right. So if you think about how there's a certain degree of fallibility. Like, I'm no doctor, he's no doctor, but we do both have experiential ways of going about living. Like, we have these processes we use to try to integrate reality to our own maps. And within diseases, within lifestyles, we realize that there's only a certain degree of things we can and cannot affect. I think we talk about a lot of this stuff I describe as woo-woo because it's entertaining. A lot of times we're able to actually find more solid things. Like, not that we understand the modularity of the way things are, but it's like there's certain aspects of something he'll approach from his perspective and I'll have from my perspective. A lot of the times, all we do is we really sort out at which point are we uncertain. And knowing at which point you're uncertain is fucking beautiful in my opinion. So, like, you know, that's why I brought up the whole thing. Like, if you're diseased and there's a cell that's supposed to regulate, let's say your carbs, or maybe it's something that regulates how much light is going to the cones of your eyes, and, you know, like, there's methodology to deal with these things if you are a scientist. We aren't scientists. We don't have methodologies. So we express our reasoning and also our reasoning why it's not something else.
Okay, so I completely missed that, so you'll forgive me. Thanks for allowing me to have the potty break. So anyway, so I know that you were saying that, like, in terms of methodology, that it produces, that it can be seen as a way to produce these specific effects, right? So
or certainty.
Okay, right. So if we're talking about, like, creating disease process or eliminating disease process, that the methods are like that the information is presented are things that you as an individual can actively pursue that'll produce those a very favorable effect, right, or a negative effect for that matter. So if you leave it to its own devices, and you allow for things to run on automatic, you run the risk then of it producing negative health consequences.
Right.
Now, having said that, then the reverse is true. Then if you actively pursue a method of training or a means to train yourself, then you can use that to, again, produce altered state of consciousness, which may, in fact, resolve whatever the health issue is.
Yeah, because earlier you were saying, like, oh, there's all these things we could show to say, like, it was either you're proving that there's methodology you can use to prove something, or you could use methodology to eliminate some of the stuff that's unnecessary that we don't know about.
Okay, so as it relates to the stuff that Dr. Joe Dispenza is doing, because he's the one who's, and again, like, the claims are being made by the people who participate in the seminars and then take that training methodology and continue using it well after the seminars and producing these health benefits. And when I say health benefits, it's a polite way of saying, like, they're undoing horrible disease processes. They're able to resolve stuff, and all these people who've done this, they all leave testimonials, like they're willing to go on camera. Now, whether or not like if you want to buy into the idea that it's all fictional and stuff like that, myself, I can't imagine why people would do that. And the reasoning is not unreasonable, so that if the entirety of who you are is run on automatic, and the result of being letting your life run subconsciously and on autopilot all the time can potentially lead to like a nocebo effect or produce negative health consequences, then the idea is then potentially that you can resolve negative psychological states, physiological states from implementing and then consistently using training methodologies that again foster greater degrees of like gratitude, which leads to greater degrees of creativity, and then you invite all the good things that can happen potentially in anyone's life. You invite them into your life by doing that, but it's only as a result of doing that, because in doing nothing, then everything's running on subconscious programming, right? That and you keep cycling through the same negative horseshit day in and day out and day in and day out.
I like having the benefit of having that anchor point, like through his methodology. If in your personal experience, which I can't prove wrong or right, if in your personal experience you notice things that are strange, then to you that is what is it? Incorrigible, infallible, one of those words?
I'm not sure which one you're willing to use that.
I think it's incorrigible, like the idea that I'm not able to prove your personal experiences.
Oh, okay, but his goes much deeper than that. Think about all the awareness there is for the placebo and nocebo effect. And I know that the effect in and of itself, a lot of hardcore materialist scientists like completely dismiss it out of hand. This guy's creating, it's not him that's doing it, it's the people that he's training them how to be able to do it, and they're the ones who are resolving all these serious conditions and health issues, and he is testing, like doing like scientific testing to accumulate data for that purpose, to prove that it's it is at work. So I'm like, if you were looking for a game changer, then what could be more revolutionary or counterculture than the idea that you could command complete, that you could steer the direction of your physical and mental health, and that you could optimize it, that you could actually take it to a point where like now you experience it in the highest quality and the highest expression. I go, to me, that one, it's an endearing idea, but two, that doesn't seem unreasonable, right?
For me, I think it's not damning, but it's evident that this guy's staking his career and everything. He's not just his career. He's staking his entire life, his relationships, on this idea that this is going on, and he doesn't want testimonials necessarily. Because like if it was purely testimonials, you could say it's a cult, you could say whatever. But he's going for like numbers. He's going
right,
for
and he's inviting, and now they're not maybe the most prestigious universities, but he's inviting universities to actually come in, and what they do is things like take blood and MRIs and stuff of everyone before the training, before they're introduced to the training, and then those same people then again they take blood, they test the blood, they do MRIs and CAT scans post the training. And he's like, you can see there's a noticeable difference in the individual just in the course of that like 1 week seminar or whatever. So
in 1 week is incredible when it comes to medicine. Like 1 week and significant changes.
But like I was saying, this could represent a game changer. Look, you ever heard of a guy named Roger Bannister?
No.
Okay, Roger Bannister was the first man to break the 4-minute mile. All the experts in medicine said there was no way a human body could run faster than a 4-minute mile. Their heart would explode, the brain would like hemorrhage, everything that you could possibly say to dissuade or to prevent someone from doing, they threw at him. He breaks the 4-minute mile within that same year. Soon as he managed to pull it off, and guess what? His brain didn't hemorrhage and his heart didn't explode. You suddenly had large numbers of people now breaking the 4-minute mile, and with every succeeding year after that, they were not only breaking the 4-minute mile, they were doing better than a 4-minute mile. Like, so they're doing like 3 minutes and like 50 seconds and shit like that. So
I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that Dr. Dispenza and his work and the people that he's working with, what if he's the modern day equivalent of Roger Bannister, and he's, breaking the 4-minute mile, and that what he's demonstrated to the rest of us is that, look, whether you actively take or participant in it and willfully take part in it, you're going to experience altered states of consciousness. If you leave it to chance, you run the risk of that altered state of consciousness producing nothing but negative effects. If you actively take part in it and you actively choose a method of training that's supposed to produce a better or an elevated state or altered state of consciousness, it leads to enormous health benefits, mental and physical. So what if the solution then to all of your problems was just a method of training, right? And we've talked endlessly about the idea of like that meditation is just a way of conditioning the mind to be present, right? So that you're more capable entering the flow state, altered state of consciousness, right? So then perhaps the idea is then we should be favoring altered states of consciousness that produce health benefits and actively pursuing those, that you as an individual, only you can do it. Because remember, the position of the medical institutions would be to err on the side of caution, and they would do exactly what they did with Roger Bannister. They try to dissuade him from attempting it. But guess what? Once that guy broke the 4-minute mile, suddenly droves of humans were breaking the 4-minute mile. And now it's a common occurrence.
That reminded me of the Roger Bannister story. There's an issue of like contagion theory, this idea that once you hear about a problem, you're looking for it more and it causes more of that problem. I think historically it was some sort of psychosis. These people were having real issues.
But couldn't that work in reverse?
Yes, like the nocebo placebo effect, except it's not quite exponential, but it's like, well, I guess it would be exponential if you're able to be viewed by multiple other people, and they're like, holy shit, that guy just meditated and lifted in the air. That's
well, I've never seen it either. I've never seen any of that stuff. I've heard tons of oral traditions and cultural stories where all that stuff is a part of the lexicon of being human, and that if you committed enough, disciplined enough, that's an outcome you can produce. I've never seen anything to that effect, but I am very aware of how often it's cited where people experience complete resolution to, like I said, fatal diseases, fatal diagnoses, and they're able to undo those. That, to me, is really telling. I'm going, maybe you can't float 3 feet above the ground. Maybe you can. Who cares? The idea that you could, that you might be able to undo, extremely negative health effects. You can see the appeal in that, right? Like it shouldn't be a question. And you go, then if you have the capacity to do that, why would you not actively try and pursue that? So I highly suggest, again, I advocate for meditation, right? I do it all the time, right? So, and for me, it's been a saving grace, but it's also a deep well, because every time I think that I've kind of got it figured out, I end up kind of experiencing or discovering something else that reveals that like there's way more to it, right? So I'm on board. I'm here for the ride. I'm just sharing that in the hopes that maybe that it might actually inspire somebody to maybe try and resolve all their own issues. And if you do, then
It doesn't matter. You don't need notoriety. The fact that you're able to take control of your health and maybe resolve all your own health issues, I think that's well, critical and primary, right? I think it's way more important than ending up on a cover of a magazine because you were able to do it or somehow gain some notoriety for it. Who gives a shit about the notoriety? The fact that now you've able, as a direct result of your own efforts, able to like essentially heal yourself. Again, it's really appealing, and there's lots of traditions where that's kind of common, right? So now whether or not you actually can or can't, that's up to you, the individual, to figure it out. And again, I couldn't say one way or the other. I'm not sure what's going on, but I find it incredibly fascinating, and more fascinating that it's got some momentum. There's people behind this. There's lots of people who are thinking like this, because it's not isolated. That's the trippy thing too. It's not this thing that's kind of like out there in the fringes. It was 40 years ago. So in the 80s, it was a total fringe thing. It was fiction. Now it's 2024. I go, you tell me how much of it is fiction, right? Anything you'd like to say? Are you kind of dumbfounded by it? Because
I've been exposed to a lot of these thoughts before, but the way it seems like it's going, I haven't read his book. I thumbed through some of it. The way it's going, and a lot of the reasoning I saw in these like short paragraphs that I read, it's not only interesting, it seems likely. Like it's the idea of healing is way out there for me, but I think if it's possible, which this book is suggestive as much as I've read, it seems suggestive. If meditation alone helps with anxiety, it's more than worth it. But it seems like
it's much deeper, it's much more profound. And this is the thing I'm trying to say, that maybe it, and the reality is the only way you'll know with any degree of certainty is by investing yourself and time and energy into it. And the end result could very well be that you end up you basically end up are able to provide yourself all the resolution to everything that troubled you ever, right? That potentially that's what it represents. This idea that like here, it's within your ability, that you don't need hyper specialists telling you what you can or can't do. I'm not saying you shouldn't trust in your doctor, okay? But maybe a combination of material medicine and then trying these methods of training could yield way more fantastic results than you can imagine. Like my feeling's always been this, that not only are we greater and more fantastic than we've ever been allowed to believe, but that religion and maybe science have done a bit of a disservice to us to make us think that we're as limited as we are, right? And when the fact is that we could be far more unlimited than we've ever been allowed to believe. Now, I don't know how much of that is, faith itself. Is that an altered state of consciousness, right?
I really want to go like way into my craziest thoughts.
Well, I'm just saying. I go like that because we started talking about altered states of consciousness, but ultimately our bias is, and here, guess what? I'll acknowledge my bias, that we're exploring it in the sense of like that, how much of a contribution, negative or positive, that it may or may not have on mental health and physical health, right? So, and again, there's, these traditions are long-standing and they've been ongoing. And the thing is, though, that we've never been able to identify specifically what it is that would allow for those things. But today, again, because of the work of people like Dr. Joe Dispenza and others, so he's not the only one, but that where there, it seems as though that we have the far greater ability to heal ourselves than not. So I'll leave it at that. Anything else is something you'd like to add to that?
No, I think we should reattempt this without treading on the same things we talked about, because there's so much here, and I think this could be like an ongoing thing.
Well, are we talking about, like, you mean in terms of like addressing mental health and physical health issues personally as an individual? Is that what you mean?
I was thinking consciousness, except next time maybe we would leave out some parts. I'm not sure what, but I'm just saying for time's sake.
Well, the idea of consciousness, well, we're going to revisit that again. I mean, we all experience it. You can't for the most part, it's something kind of defies the ability to define. Although that there are some experts in some fields who would absolutely tell you that they know what it is, but I have my doubts, right? And again, it's something that's worthy of just discussion, right? So there we stand. Time check.
2 hours, 5 minutes. Right now it's 6:21.
Okay, I think that might be a perfectly good place to bring it to a close. Any thoughts, feelings, ideas?
Thoughts? None. Feelings? Gratitude.
Well, I'll share one little tidbit before we close out. I'm not one who's a huge fan of transcendental meditation. Transcendental meditation is a form that uses phrases or mantras that you repeat over and over again. But what I recently started doing was just repeating throughout the entire meditation cycle. Again, in my own thoughts. All I would say is thank you, love, and gratitude. That's it. I just constantly repeat that. Right? So empirically, I don't know that I can tell you that it's made a measurable difference or not. But it's, again, like I said, it's just made for an interesting element, and I really do enjoy to do it. And for me, my highest hopes is that I'm able to successfully take what I'm doing out of the practice and then completely integrate it into every waking moment and the day. Whether or not I'm able to or not, I don't even care. For me, it's there's fun in attempting it, right? Because again, it speaks to this idea of self-mastery, right? Which I constantly advocate for. That you can be the master of your own domain, right? And training is what will allow for that. So, okay. So just in closing, I think I'd like to say, question everything, including yourself, especially yourself. Seek balance. Seek knowledge. Seek understanding. Become a renegade, individualist, humanist, critical, objective thinker. Thank you for your time.